Alright, new viewers and game viewers, it is time for our new part 2 unused content in games, and today we are continuing with Pokemon Black and White part 6, going into Pokemon data, that being beta names for Pokemon, their beta typings, and beta base stats, before it was all changed to what we see in the final game, with this here beta Hydreigon sprite over here. So, let's click on here right now and begin, but before we truly begin, I do gamer content like this all the time. If that's the type of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's free and can always change your mind later on. Anyways, starting off with some of the beta names for some of the Gen 5 Pokemon. Like Victini over here, its Japanese name, or its name before it was changed, is Vicuntini, which sounds dumb. And to go through this a little bit faster, I'm gonna just slowly, well maybe not slowly, but scroll through each of the different names since there's quite a lot here, and this video would end up dragging out like crazy if I were to read all of it. So, I'll probably just say, give some commentary for some of the more notable ones. So, if you need to pause at any point, please pause. And don't hesitate to take your time reading each of the different names. And even some of the meanings for them, like you see over here with Emboar. One of its old beta names, Yaki Abudo, being roast, oink, and to doze off. Interesting. Apparently Pat Rat's name was going to mean woodchuck at some point in the July 2009 build. Interesting. No, it's not that interesting. Same with Lilliput just straight up being called Puppy. I mean, then again, there are some Gen 1 Pokemon names that are basically just words in Japanese anyways. I mean, what? Isn't Zapdos's, Cantonian Zapdos's, Japanese name just Thunder? And Payteacher's just gonna straight up be called Broccoli at one point. Funny. Or at least that would be the meaning of his name. You get it. I mean, Rayaburarasu was pretty cool. The Lightning Zebra. Can't get mad at that. And Raipura. And then changed to Zabaraika in the final game. That's actually really cool. I might start calling some sugar Zabaraika. I kind of like this symbol. Or that Seismitoad, actually. Seismitoad's final name in Japanese. Gamaryo something. Gamajirog. Something like that. It sounds pretty cool, I think, if you could say it right. Takegi for sock. That was Nageki. And one of Scraggy's beta names was Sundomi. A Sundome meaning martial arts terms for stopping just before hitting someone. Huh, never knew that. Wouldn't say it's Scraggy's fighting style, but whatever. And the Scrafty over here is Zaruzukin. Makes me wonder what that means. Too bad it doesn't say it there. Zorowa instead of Zorua, and Zoraku. Pretty similar to what we got in English. And then one of the best lines in the game, the Ridiculous line, Rankurusu. Pretty decent. I think that's cool. Suwana for a Swana. Barely changes. So we got in the final game. And then Ducklet apparently in the December 2009 build was going to be called Shiba. Just Shiba, okay. And Vanillite over here, Sururi. I'm going to try to say Vanillix's beta name over here. Tsuruda. Or Baibanira is its final game name in Japanese. I don't want to leave Vanilla out of that. Let me say that name real fast. Banirichi. Or Suruto, and then Vanillite's final game name, Vanipuchi. Alright, we got what I'm calling a beta name for Ferrothorn over here. Gokeen. From Gokin Alloy. This name was previously used by Metagross during the development of Ruby and Sapphire. Huh, and they tried to reuse one. I guess as a placeholder before they changed it later on. Always cool when they go back to some older ideas sometimes, or even just reuse them as placeholders for a bit until they have what they want to use for it. Just moving a little fast there. Jernigan's beta name in the 2009 December build, Orachi, I guess would be how it's pronounced, and its final name, Kuramugan. Dragon's final Japanese name is Sazan Zora, or its name beforehand was Dragoon. I kind of like that one. And then for the Swords of Justice, starting with Cabellion, Atosu, or Anthos of the Three Musketeers, his final name being changed to Kabaruon. And then for Terrakion, Borutosu, or Porthos, one of the Three Musketeers, and then Terrakion, just pretty much that. In the final game, and then Aramisu, or Aramis, one of the Three Musketeers. And Virizion is Virision's final, or Vrizal, excuse me, its final name. And for Tornadus over here, Kazakami, from Kaze Wind and Kami God, referring Fujin, the god of wind. And then Torun Urosu, as its final game name, Rakami, or a thunder god over here, referring to the Raijin, the god of thunder. And then its final game name, Boruto Usu. I think it's only fitting that we talk about the box arts. It might come, or Chin for Reshiram, might come from Shunjitsu, meaning truth. And then Suramu is its final game name, and then just Mu for Zakram. Might come from Mu, meaning nothing, 0. Or Zakuramu in the final game. And Landorus, Tsuchi no Kami, from Tsuchi no Kami, god of earth. And then Randorusu as its final game name, Kirim. Rai, probably for Mirai in the future. And we'll see that later on in Miraidon in Generation 9. Akiremu in the final game. For Keldeo, Darutanisu, or the Artagnan, one of the Three Musketeers who became the 4th member. Arkaru Dio is its final game name. Meloetta doesn't have anything too notable, and Genesect, and then we have some of the cut Pokemon Japanese names. And for Genesect, Insekuta. Literally just insect. And then its final game name, Dinosekuto. And then for both Tanizu line, I believe that is the Pokemon that later became the Time Pole line, that we went through in one of the previous videos. And then Gorokin. I'm not gonna be honest here, I don't remember which one that is. One of its names was gonna be Panchinu, for Punch, and Inu Dog, I guess. It's probably for that unused normal type dog looking Pokemon. Tanizu, Tanino, and Tani Kingu. From Pond River Snail and King. From Pond River Snail, and then just Pond River Snail again. Alright, that's the first part of this done. Next up, the base stats. And once again, just like the previous part we just went through, I think I'll only talk about some of the notable ones. Because here it shows some of the beta stats that we were going to get, and then other abilities. And you'll notice that, or other abilities that I'll have in previous builds. You'll notice that some of these abilities actually match abilities of other Pokemon from previous generations, likely used as placeholders. Like you see how Victini originally had Serene Grace as its main ability before Victory Star was put in the final game. Likely reusing Jirachi stats since it's the only one of those legendary Pixie type Pokemon, you know, Mew, Selby, etc., that has Serene Grace. And it seems like when you're originally going to battle it, in Liberty Garden, it was going to, well, in all of these builds, it's holding a star piece. As both its first and second item, just have it holding a star piece all the time. I don't get it, but whatever. Many Univin Pokemon start life as copy-paste clones, as I mentioned, of existing Pokemon. Sometimes the first revisions to include a Pokemon's data might be touched up a little, but there is generally enough for the original Pokemon's information to be able to conclude what it was cloned from. In this case, Victini was cloned from Jirachi. This assessment is further reinforced by viewing the history of each Pokemon's level up set, which can be viewed here. No need to view that there, but it's a nice little resource to have. While Victini's stats and typing weren't changed, its abilities went through multiple revisions, starting out with Serene Grace due to being cloned from Jirachi. Then changed to Steadfast, then back to Serene Grace before setting on his signature Victory Star in early April of 2010. I've got Snivy line over here. Notice how it has Chlorophyll as its hidden ability, likely copy-pasted from Venusaur, or from the Bulbasaur line, before it's chasing Contrarian. Just Contrarian, I don't know why I said Contrarian. Nothing too notable with some of its stats here. I guess Snivy was originally going to have slightly higher special attack, while Superior was going to have actually that's speed. Superior was going to have slightly lower speed before being buffed up a little, while both Snivy and Servine were going to have slightly higher speed, but that's about it. And here's just a different level of move pools. Once again, if you'd like to pause at any point, then don't hesitate to do so. And it seems like we have a line of text over here. I'm not going to read all of them. But as I stated before, the Bulbasaur line being used as a placeholder. Next up, Tepig. Tepig's stats seem relatively the same, though it seems both Tepig and Pignite, and later on Emboar, were originally going to have Sheer Force as their hidden abilities to have Thick, Fat, and Reckless, respectively. And it seemed in this build, the February 2010 build, of 17th specifically, Emboar was originally going to have Thick Fat, which I'm glad they changed because that's kind of a worthless ability for Emboar, a Pokemon that already resists both ice and fire type attacks. Didn't even notice that either. It seems that Emboar and Pignite were originally going to be pure fire types before being later changed to fire fighting. Little did Game Freak know, a lot of people would not like that decision very much. But, whatever, let's not talk about that. Firefighter's a cool typing anyways. Alright, and we have the Oshawott line. Unlike the other two Unova starters, they still had shell armor into the later parts of development. It looks like no other placeholder abilities. And not too many notable stat differences other than, I guess, their special, like Oshawott and Duot's special attack was going to be a little lower, while Samurot's was going to be a bit higher. Or actually vice versa. Samurot's was going to be a little lower. Oshawott Duot's were going to be a bit lower as well. Or going to be a bit higher before being lowered in the final game. Oshawott line only gained minor changes. Oshawott and Duot lost 2 points in special attack, with Samurott gaining 3 points in special attack instead. Unlike Snivy and Tepig, their hidden abilities started as shell armor and stayed that way into the final game. Alright, Patrat line, nothing much to see here other than I guess it was originally going to have Analytic as one of its natural abilities. Doesn't matter that much, no. Alright, once again, let's just scroll on through here, and I'll talk about the more notable ones, such as this one for Stoutland over here. It was originally going to have base 110 attack at some point in development, but then lowered to base 100. And then was going to have much higher HP, but then lowered to base 85. You get the gist, you see all these. It would have been cool if it actually kept Justified, I think. But Sandrush ain't that bad either, I guess. Because back then, Justified was the signature ability of the Swords of Justice. And I think the only other Pokemon that could get that ability at the time, like as hidden ability specifically, were Arcanine, or Arcanine if you want to be funny, and Lucario. Alright, Lightbird and Purloin don't have that much different. I guess a few stat differences, and that's about it. Lightbird was apparently going to have much lower HP, it looks like. And a slightly lower special attack. That's about it. And I guess slightly higher defenses for whatever reason. Whatever. Guess they lowered his defense for his HP to compensate for that. Alright, the Elemental Monkeys. Nothing much. Just Pansage over here having Vital Spirit at some point. I think we're using Mankey's stats for a placeholder. You see the same thing with both Panseer and Panpour. But once again, nothing too notable. It seems at one point they were going to be holding a Firestone or a Leftovers at some point as a potential item to hold, but that was probably going to be like a 1% item held. It would have been cool if they kept that on there, actually, but they didn't for whatever reason. You know, I can read this one. The three base Elemental Monkeys all had the same stat changes as each other, getting more refined stats in late December, having their attack and special attacks switched in February. losing 1 speed at the same time, then gaining 10 in special attack along with 5 in HP in early April. Their evolutions went through similar changes after their stats were refined in December. They changed in February, albeit differently. Their HP, defense, and special defense dropped by 10. Their attack and special attack switched, and they gained 1 point in speed. Their stats would also be finalized in April, adding 30 points to special attack, as well as 5 for good measure. 5 HP for good measure. All the monkeys started with Vital Speeders ability, then gained Overgrow, Blaze, and Torrent as its hidden abilities in December. This will later be changed to their hidden abilities. Well, first main abilities and hidden abilities, as I said, with them receiving Gluttony as a standard one in February. Alright, here's the Moon line. Looks like it was reusing cast form stats beforehand. Moon and Musharna both started off with placeholder stats, but it took less than a month for them to receive their near-final stats. In December, they lost 1 point to speed and gained 1 point in HP, then gained 7 points for special attack in February. Musharna also gained 5 points in speed, because it definitely needed that. And both received the Synchronize and the Telepathy abilities at the same time. It's going to have 24 speed, make it even better in Trick Room as well. Man, Musharna's cool. It needs a bit more attention, in my opinion. Oh, it is. Peta, nothing too notable here. I guess getting its hidden ability Rivalry, which is a sucky ability. Alright, Blitzels of Striker, nothing too notable here, I'd say. According to the stats and evolution data, Blitzels of Striker, originally occupied each other's slots, and a mistake that would be fixed just 3 days later. Blitzel stats were nearly finalized quite early on, the only change being a 3-point deduction for both defenses, which went into its speed stat. Substriker gained a 10-point boost to attack before its stats were finalized in a similar way, though it only lost 2 points at its defense while gaining the same 6-point speed boost. Initially having Volt Absorb, they quickly received Static and Motor Drive as standard ability. Static was then changed to Lightning Rod when they gained their ability Sap Sipper. Next up, Roggenrola looks like it was going to initially have Geodude stats, and it was going to be part ground type as a placeholder. And the rest of the line has the other members of the Geodude line stats. Other than that, nothing too notable. Woobat and Swoobat were normal flying type in placeholders, before being changed to Psychic type later on. And then having their abilities change in the February 2010 build. It looks like Swoobat was also going to have much higher special attack. Part of me kind of wishes they kept that. Or I keep thinking that special attack, that's speed. My mistake. And initially it was going to evolve High Friendship at night. Interesting. I mean, Friendship evolutions are annoying as is, so I'm kind of glad they changed that. As I will know later on with a few certain fossil Pokemon in Generation 6 from my experience, but yes. The Drillbur line. No too notable changes, other than the fact that apparently Drillbur and Excadrill were originally going to have Speed Boost at some point. Oh, come on, they should have kept that. That would have been sick. Oh, that would have been, like, Excadrill's already absurdly broken. Imagine if it had Speed Boost. Oh my god, that thing's getting banned off of Ubers. But, luckily, that didn't happen. And they were going to be pure ground type instead of ground steel for Excadrill. Drillbur started out with placeholder stats. They gained more refined ones later on in October. Its stats were finalized rather quickly, simply adding 3 to speed and 5 to both special stats. For whatever reason. I mean, the extra special defense is nice, but do you really need the special attack? Whatever. Excadrill started out as a pure ground type like its pre-evolution, not getting the steel secondary type until March. It received the same stat changes as Drillbur at the same time too. The biggest change for the molds comes from the ability starting off with Oblivious, then changing to Sandveil and Simple. Is that... No, I was about to say it's placeholder stats for Hippopotas, but no. Simple was changed to Sandforce, then Drillbur's Sandveil became Sand Rush, and changed that Excadrill wouldn't get until April. Their original hidden ability was Speed Boost, which was thankfully changed to Mold Picker later on. As I stated before, that would have broke competitive right there, and Excadrill was already considered really good at the game's release, and still to this day at the time of me making this video. Better stay good late in later games. Alright, Audino next. was originally going to have Natural Cure instead of Healer. They should have kept Natural Cure, but whatever. And then Regenerator being given later, because Regenerator is an ability that was introduced in Gen 5, so they likely gave it to it as one of the premier users of the ability. Nothing else too notable here, other than it can now hold berries starting in the early March build. Which, as you've seen in my recent Pokemon Black Nuzlocke, yeah, as grinding off of a bunch of odd nodes, those orange citrus berries were a little annoying to deal with, I'll be honest. Oddnode's initial stats were originally more balanced, aside from slightly higher speed and 90 HP. A week later, its stats would be finalized, giving it a decent buff to its HP and defensive stats, at the cost of some speed. At the same time, it would receive Regenerator followed by receiving Natural Cure with Healer, around the time hidden abilities started being assigned. And here are the changes to its stats. The Timber line initially used the Machop line as a placeholder, it looks like. Other than that, not too many notable differences here. The Timber line started out as clone to Machop line, even though they technically are already, but you get that already. After getting actual stats in February, the only changes the line received would be to their EXP yields and Pokedex color, which they were changed to gray, gray, and brown, respectively, instead of gray, gray, yellow later on. I think that likely comes from the beta designs for Timber Girder and Chronic Elder that we saw in previous episodes, before they went to their final designs. And the XP yield looks a little different as well. Not that that matters too much. Alright, the Temple line. Not too many notable differences over here from the final. They end up holding Person Berries later in later builds, it looks like. The Temple line were very late additions, replacing a group of Pokemon named Tansu, Tanino, and Tanakingu. Much like the Timber line, the only changes they received after getting their initial stats were to their base EXP and colors. Not too many notable changes. That seems like it uses some placeholder stats from Sock before it got its own stats. And now Sock with its stats being a little different here. Judging by their stats, Throw and Sock originally occupied each other's slots, with their stats eventually being swapped in March. And before that, they went through some minor changes before being finalized, with both seeing minor adjustments to their special attack and both defenses, as well as Sock's eventually Throw's speed. The only changes to their abilities would be Sock having Scrappy instead of Scrappy replaced with Guts. Then to Sturdy once the stats were switched with each other. Imagine Scrappy Sock in Generation 8, and then if it shows up again in Generation 10 blocking Intimidate, that'd be neat. Anyways, Sawada line. Not too many notable changes, other than getting some different abilities. Both Sawaddles on Swadloon's first sets of non-placeholder stats made them even weaker than they would be eventually be. By December, they were given small buffs to all their stats except for HP. Leavanny also gained a buff around the same time as its pre-evolutions, gaining boost to its attack defense and speed at the cost of its special attack. Venipede line. Remember they had Quick Feet back in Gen 5, and then in Gen 6 they changed it to Speed Boost. So it seems that Speed Boost ability control was originally going to get one somewhere else. Unlike their fellow bug types in the Swaddle line, Venipede and Whirlpede both received nerfs after their additions. Venipede lost some HP, special attack, and a chunk of both of its defenses, and only received 2 points of speed. Whirlpede was instead given some slight boost to its defense and special defense, while having some points taken out of all of its other stats. Scolipede also saw some stat adjustments, meaning both of its defensive stats lowered while gaining a respectable amount of speed. Then, later, trading even more of its speed and special attack for more physical attack. Next up, Katani. Mostly just some ability changes. Apparently Katani was originally going to have solar power. Out of that is reusing Sunkern and Sunflora stats. Yes, well, not entirely, since Sunflora definitely doesn't have base 125 special attack. Oh, look at that, I was right, Sunkern line. The Katani line started as a clone of the Sunkern line. Both Katani and Whimsicott first sets of actual stats had them more focused on special attack, and were a lot slower than their final counterparts. In Yeah, imagine that in VGC. Imagine if it never had Prankster. Oh boy. I don't think Whimsicott and Condi would be as good as they are now, if that were the case. But anyways. Instead of actual abilities, and focus more on special attack were a lot slower than their final counterparts. In December, these were changed to more closely resemble their final stats. Condi had its HP and attack, stats lowered to boost its defenses and speed. While Whimsicott lost points in both defenses and special attack. To gain more speed and attack for whatever reason it needed that extra attack, whatever, followed by some minor adjustments in February. Both of their primary stats were intended to be chlorophyll early on, which later became their hidden abilities. And solar power was removed from them entirely, it being replaced with Prankster. Thank the Lord that happened. Also, one of Petalil's placeholder stats, or Lilligant's placeholder stats, is of the fighting type with Guts. So at some point in development, it looks like Lilligant was originally going to be fighting type. Hisswind Lilligant confirmed? How much you want to bet this was the inspiration for Hisswind Lilligant to some extent? But aside from that, some ability changes, no other noticeable differences besides the glaring fighting type difference over there. And originally its evolution method was going to be a Leaf Stone instead of a Sunstone. That wouldn't have made that much of a difference, to be honest with you. I mean, I'd say Generation 5 was the first generation where getting evolutionary stones was much easier than previous games. Well, besides Heart Gold, Soul Silver, but discussion for another day. Petalil line is a clone of the Tangela line. Petalil started off a lot weaker, then receiving 10 to plus 10 to all of its stats except speed, which gained plus 20 in December. The Lilligant's early revision is due to it and taking the slot of the cut Garukin. By the end of the month, it got actual stats, and then had its stats tweaked later on, losing some points in speed and both special stats, and receiving buffs to attack and defense. Petalil and Lilligant also had their gender ratios changed, starting out at 50% and then 25 to 75 in favor of female. Sorry, that's my door. And then 100% female by February. Next up, Basculin, having some stat differences, and it looks like Basculin reuses Relicanth stats early on. Other than that, nothing too notable other than some ability changes. I pause if you'd like to read this description. It seems Sandile was originally going to be water type. I mean, we already have a water crocodile, so a ground-based one was a nice change of pace. It seems Crocodile was going to have slightly higher attack before, and Moxie didn't exist as an ability, I guess, yet during those builds. But later builds, they put that ability in. Next up, Darumaka. They're originally going to have Sturdy, which is interesting to think about. Imagine Darmanitan with Sturdy instead of Sheer Force or Zen mode. That's interesting. Other than that, most of its stats are pretty much the same. Darumaka and Darmanitan didn't receive their fire type until until late October. Originally being pure normal type, at the same time they received proper stats, which weren't altered at any point before release. Both had Sturdy as their standard abilities, which was then made into their hidden abilities, then removed entirely when Zen mode was implemented. Darumaka strangely also received Zen mode, which was then changed in less than a month, presumably due to being an error. Most likely. Maractus. Maractus changes from being a physical attacker to a special attacker a few months after its first stats were implemented, gaining very slight buffs to its speed and defense at the same time. I don't think it would have changed Maractus that much either way, honestly. Dwebble and Crustle. Crustle got higher defense, and that's about it looks like. That's the only notable change I can see here, other than I guess some items it can hold. It took Dwebble and Crustle until December to receive their more refined stats. Dwebble didn't change after that point, but Crustle gained an extra 10 points to both defense and special defense in February, losing 40 points of speed in the process. Scraggy and Scrafty, using Tyrogue and Hitmonchan stats as placeholders respectively before their real abilities and stats came in. Other than that, nothing too notable. It looks like originally their egg groups are going to be, well, that's when they were using the Tyrogue line as placeholders, so that's a little different. And later in development, it seems they were given the dark type instead of being pure fighting. Scraggy is a clone of Tyrogue, and Scrafty is a clone of Hitmonchan. Both gained more refined stats within days, but it took until February for them to gain their dark type, along with very, very small buffs to their HP and speed stats. Sigilif has different stats over here and was given Tinted Lens as a hidden ability instead of one of its natural abilities. as well as Magic Guard, which is such a cool ability. And some of its stats are definitely different over here too, thank the Lord, because Sigilif is cool. Sigilif also started out quite a bit weaker. Between October and December, it lost 2 attack and gained 7 speed, as well as swapping Tinted Lens for Wonder Skin, until receiving boost to all of its other stats in February, alongside getting Tinted Lens back as a hidden ability. Next up, EMS, was originally going to have Mime Jr.'s abilities, it looks like. Other than that, nothing too notable over here. Other than this freakishly high defense stat it would have, and I guess would later be given to Kafagrigus. And much like Blistle and Zepstroika, these two also accompanied each other's slots. Though it took until November to rectify this. They would both be finalized a month later, EMS gaining respectable boost to its HP and special stats, while Kafagrigus lost 10 attack and 5 special attack to gain 3 points in HP, but also swapped Filter and Soundproof for the signature Mummy at the same time. Alright, Tortuga line. Looks like it used, I think, Kabuto and Kabutops' stats as placeholders before. Other than that, Kirikosta getting much higher defense later on and some much lower speed, slightly higher special attack. You get it. And here are the abilities that it has till the final game. The Tortuga line began as a clone of the Kabuto line. Something notable about this line is how much later their stats were finalized. Mid-April at the latest. Both would receive nerfs to their speed and special defense in Kirikosta's case. So both to boost their defense and special attack, likely to fit their design more. Alright, Archon and Archeops. Originally using Almost Star over here, I believe, as a placeholder, but pure rock type for some reason. And then later getting their Horde Defeatist ability. Not too many notable changes other than that. The Archon line was like Tortuga, a clone of the Kabuto line. Alright, never mind, Kabuto instead of Almanite. However, unlike Tortuga, these early birds, get it, early birds, whatever, had their stats finalized much earlier. Seems like they've been weighed down by Defeatist since the start, sadly. For balancing reasons. I feel like the only reason Archeops even has the base stats totals has was just so it can match its Pokedex number of 567, which is part of the reason I even gave it Defeatist. Alright, Trubbish. It was originally going to have Pickup, apparently, but that's about it. Nothing too notable there. Alright, Zoroark and Zoroark were originally going to have Prankster as abilities. Not Prankster, imagine. Pressure as abilities. Kinda glad they changed that. I guess that was before the illusion mechanic was thought of. These two had their stats finalized very early in comparison to some of the others here, because there's basically Gen 5's Lucario. By October, they were more or less complete. It took until December for them to get their signature illusion abilities. Having pressure at first. That definitely wouldn't have helped the people who thought Zoroark was a legendary at first, would it? Nope, not at all. Alright, Minccino and Cinccino, having some different stats later on in development and different abilities. That's about it, and Cinccino's probably going to be a bit faster. Alright, originally, apparently, Cinccino was going to be a level up method instead of a Dawnstone evolution method, which I could have sworn it evolved with a Shiny Stone, not a Dawnstone. Ended up evolving one in my Nuzlocke, so yeah, no, that should say Shiny Stone, not Dawnstone. Then again, that could have also been changed in later builds. And it's just not shown here. Minccino was mostly complete by the end of October, aside from Soundproof being one of his abilities over Technician, and was strangely generous. It also evolved by level up at first instead of using a stone. Cinccino went through a total stat change in February. It lost 5 points in HP, both defense and speed. It lost 30 special attack and gained a whopping 40 base attack. Honestly good. I like physical Cinccino. Hits very hard. I wonder if they kept its attack low like that, if Cinccino would have a much different role. Most likely. Alright, we already read that. Next up, the Gothito line. They still were going to have Shadow Attack for most of the build, it looks like. And apparently they're originally going to have Prankster. Interesting. The Gothito line started out as a clone of the Abra line. All three of them received proper stats. In February, that weren't altered much later, except for replacing Prankster with Frisk. Ouch. Yeah, seriously, imagine if they kept Prankster. Alright, still the best Psychic type ever created, Reuniclus, which was originally going to have a Regenerator as its main ability instead of a hidden ability. And I guess it shares some of the stats with, I want to say Hypno? No, it's not Hypno. It's supposed to start out as a bit frailer and weaker originally, with two underwhelming abilities in Synchronize and Anticipation. Yeah, those abilities suck. In December, it gained Regenerator, and in February, it has its defenses and special attack raised slightly, along with getting Magic Guard. Devotion underwent similar changes to its pre-evolution, except for its defenses staying the same. Reuniclus, on the other hand, all of its stats altered in February, giving it a 15-point increase to its HP and attack while losing 5 points in all of its other stats. Alright, Ducklet and Swanna. Not too many notable changes here, just some small stat changes. And I guess it was originally going to have Swift Swim at some point. Ducklet is clone of the Lingo line. Both quickly gained proper stats within a few days, while Ducklet would be unchanged. Going into the final game, Swanna would see all of its stats decreased by 2 in February. Both also traded Swift Swim for Big Hex. That's funny. If taken out of context, that is. And apparently originally the Vanilla line were going to be part water type. Or they were just a placeholder, or they were just using the Seal line, or the Spheal line as a placeholder. And originally it looks like they were going to keep the water type, but being changed to pure ice. Imagine if they're like slushy Pokemon instead of just straight ice cream. That would have been cool. Other than that, not too many notable changes besides that. And originally at some point in development it's going to hold a Nevermelt. I just kind of wish they kept that in, but whatever. Would have been like a 10% encounter or something. The Vanilla line is a clone of the Spheal line, but it seems they were going to keep their ice water typing at first, as they stayed that way all the way until early May. All three of these ice creams had their stats finalized shortly after being added. The only change aside from the typings were Vanillish and Vanillix's EXP yields. Alright, Bambi, I mean Deerling and Sawsbuck. Not too many notable changes here. The stats are mostly the same throughout these builds. I was given Sap Supper later on, it looks like. These two started as pure normal type strangely, but would gain their grass type soon after. The Deerling had its stats altered twice. First in December by adding 5 HP and 10 defense, and again in February, trading 5 points from defense, special attack, and special defense to gain 5 attack and 10 speed. Sawsbuck also received 2 stat changes at similar times, albeit less beneficial than Deerling's. In December, it gained 15 HP and 10 defense, but lost 10 attack, but then gained 5 attack back at the cost of 5 special attack and 10 of HP in both of its defenses. Next up, Emolga. Emolga started as a pure electric type and gained the flying type in December. It would gain its first set of non-placeholder stats at that time. But all of them were changed later on, gaining more bulk speed and special attack at the cost of its attack. Parablast and Estabilia. Some notable stat differences over here, and not originally, that's what it has in the final game, or near the final game. Once again, apologize for the door, it's a little windy outside. And that was blowing the door, you get it. Alright, and originally, as we saw in one of the previous episodes, Carablast was going to have a separate evolution that didn't involve the Shelmet trade gimmick, but that was changed in later builds. Our Fungus and Amoongeist. Amoongeist was going to have much higher HP at some point in development. Kind of glad they lowered its HP. It's honestly way too tanky for my experience for what it is. It's also going to have lower attack too. And higher defenses. Or higher defense. And 10 speed. Imagine if I had base 10 speed in the final game. Oh my god, the ultimate Trick Room Pokemon right there. Alright, excuse me, let me just close this door. Don't want that to keep interrupting. Apologies for that, should have kept that closed. But anyways. Our Fungus gained 3 changes to its stats before release. Compared to its first stats to its final ones. Its defensive stats were 10 points higher, or 6 points in the case of its HP, while its speed and attack were all 5 points lower. Meanwhile, Amoonguss would have been even more obscene in VGC, seriously it would have been. Additional 8 points in HP in both defenses, while both attacking stats and speed were all 20 points lower. Imagine a world with that running around. Amoonguss is already really freaking good and really annoying to deal with. Imagine if it had even more tailored stats for its role. Someone on the team must have realized the horror that they'd create, because by the end of February, its stats were completed. And having much lower HP, much lower defenses, and higher attack, and higher speed. Because, yeah, it would have been the ultimate trick in Pokemon, would have been annoying as hell to deal with. Just, nah, bro. And originally, the Frosh line were going to be pure water type, but then we're also given the poison type at some point in development. And didn't have Curse Body yet. As I stated in the Nuzlocke, originally, Frosh and Jellicent were going to be pure water type, but they were changed to Part Ghost type just to have more interesting water types in the Univindex, which I'm pretty sure the only besides Swan, of course, and Keldeo, the only non-pure water type, pure water type Pokemon in the Univindex, which is pretty funny. Frost and Jellicent started as pure water types and gained their secondary types later on in October. Except, wait, poison type? Apparently, these jellyfish were Planet V water poison. Probably as a parallel to, and a bit of a clone to Tentacruel at the time, most likely. By December, they'd finally received their proper ghost type, probably to distance them from Tentacruel, who'd already taken the title of water poison type jellyfish Pokemon, like many years before they existed. Frillish stats were finalized along with the updates to his typing. Gaining an extra 5.6 HP in special defense, Jellicent was much less fortunate, after it had received the same stat changes as its pre-evolution. All of its stats were reduced by 5 in February. Poor thing. Damp also used to be the line's secondary ability until it gained Curse Body, after which it was made into a hidden ability. Alomola, later being given Healer, Hydration, and Regenerator once again, and apparently was going to have even higher HP. Alright, next up the Joltik and Galvantula line. Galvantula is apparently going to have higher attack at some point, but lowered special attack. Kind of glad they changed that, because special attacking I think works better for this typing than physical attacking does. Now, Ferroseed and Ferrothorn were apparently originally going, well, actually not originally, they just used Bronzor and Bronzong's stats as placeholders, it looks like. And then later on, we're going to be pure Steel type before giving the Grass type. I guess to have more interesting Steel types in the game. And Ferroseed Light started out as a clone with Bronzor line. In February, both received their finalized stats, albeit with one noticeable omission: no Grass type. It, along with a 50-50 gender ratio, wouldn't be given to them until April. In fact, this was such a late addition that neither Ferroseed or Ferrothorn could learn Attract until upon release. It took until Generation 8 for that mistake to be corrected. Alright, next up, Clink line, using the Magnemite line as a sort of not entirely as a placeholder, but I guess originally going to be part electric type. And light metal and heavy metal would have been just as useless as plus and minus, let's be real. Alright, was Clear Body's a decent hidden ability. Interestingly, the Clink line all started out as Steel Electric type, with the sturdy abilities connecting them more closely to the Magnemite line. This was short-lived as their secondary types was removed in December. At the same time, they gained both light metal and heavy metal, which were changed to plus and minus in February. All three also started out with a 50-50 gender ratio and the undiscovered egg group, which were changed in December to Generalist and Mineral, respectively. As for their stats, Clink and Clang gained boosts to both attacking and defensive stats, 5 or 10 points each, respectively, whereas Clink lost 10 points in HP in both special stats, putting them all back into speed. Alright, the Tynamo one are all apparently going to be part Steel. Actually, no, because they were using the Magnemite line's stats as placeholders at the time. And then later builds look like they're going to keep them as Steel somehow. Funny that. And the Tynamo line started out as Magnemite clones. By early February, all that had changed were their abilities, being plus, minus, and motor drive, 2 of which were seemingly meant for Clink line instead, before all 3 gained their finalized stats just a week later. Right, LGM, using Meditite and Medicham stats as placeholders, it looks like, before we got their later stats. LGM line is a clone of the Meditite line, and next up the Wick line. And Chandelure, back when Chandelure was originally going to have Shadow Tag, which was never released, and then in Gen 6 onward, its ability was changed to Infiltrator. I mean, Infiltrator's still a pretty decent ability, but Shadow Tag would have been much cooler, honestly. You would have seen that everywhere, you honestly would have seen that everywhere. The Axew line. It seems like Haxorus are usually going to be Dark type with much lower stats as placeholders, it looks like, and have no guard at some point. Kinda glad they changed that. Alright, Cubchoo and Beartick originally going to be part Dark, but most likely just placeholder stats before being changed to Ice type. And apparently, Beartick was originally going to have Sheer Force. Honestly, would have been a better ability in my opinion, but Its abilities here I think are okay, and then later in Gen 7 when it got Slush Rush. Coriogonal is a Jinx clone, as you see here. That's why it has a part Psychic type and its hidden ability, or its other abilities as placeholders. I have Shelmet and a Selger. I guess Selger was originally going to keep the Shell Armor ability, but I'm glad they changed that. A lot of placeholder looking stats we got over here. A Stunfisk, as we saw in one of the previous vids, was originally going to be Water Ground type, but then later changed to Ground Electric. And then it seems to have used Gastrodon stats and abilities as a placeholder. Going to Gastrodon and Fueline. Being a clone of Meditite Medicham over here before its changes. Drudigan was apparently at some point in development going to be part Dark type, and was a clone of Tauros for some reason. Honestly, Drudigan should have had Intimidate. It looks like it could have that ability. I mean, I guess the reason they took Dark typing off of it is just so it wouldn't overlap with the DNO line. Golett. Using, I believe those are Bayonet's. Yeah, those are Bayonet's stats and abilities as placeholders. Going to the Shuppet line. At some point in development, actually, Ponder was originally going to be Dark. Actually, yeah, it was originally going to be Dark Fire type before being changed to Dark Steel. Imagine a Dark Fire type King Gambit. But also uses Houndour and Houndoom stats as placeholders. Going down to our line, Muffalon over here was originally at some point in development going to have Sheer Force or Soundproof. Rufflet over here was going to be pure flying type before being changed to later on. Since, keep in mind, this, besides Tornadus, this was before Rookidee and Corvuscar existed. So it was originally going to be pure flying type with thick fat of all abilities, which is weird. And Braviary is going to have slightly higher HP, it looks like. Followed by line, also using Houndour and Houndoom stats as placeholders. And then we got their final changes later on. Humor is originally going to have the white, or also uses Torkoal stats as a placeholder, and then later has the White Smoke ability as its hidden ability, just making immune to stat drops. Not too useful in this Pokemon, in my opinion. Neat signature ability to think about, though, I guess. Torkoal clone. Kevin Durant, just Durant, was a Mawile clone. Just having it as a placeholder. The entire Deono line used the Dratini line as placeholders in early builds before having their abilities later on changed. Our La Vesta line using, or originally going to be Fire Flying type with Natural Cure apparently, before being changed to Bug Fire type with Flame Body and Swarm and these stats. And it was a clone of the Swablu line apparently, but we're again originally going to be Fire Flying. Look at that, Compound was originally going to be Fighting Steel type instead of Steel Fighting type, totally different. And its stats are placeholder stats for Suicune. Dracon, placeholder stats for Suicune as well. And was originally going to be Fighting Rock instead of Rock Fighting, totally different. And I guess it having pressure in the earlier builds was before Justified was made. And then, say it with me everybody, Verizon Wireless over here was going to be Fighting Grass type instead of Grass Fighting type, totally different. Also, Tornadus was originally going to have Levitate. Oh, because it's Latios as a placeholder. Imagine that if it kept Intimidate. No, I almost Intimidate Levitate. That is so stupid. Flying type Rotom. Anyways. Thunderous, also Latios clone. Electric type Levitate. Later, just like with Electros, would have been pretty busted. Though apparently their stats were lowered from 600 base stat total to 580, but later it's got to keep its 600 base stat total? Okay. Actually, oh yeah, no, that's why they changed it again. Latios placeholder. Our Reshiram, some of Reshiram stats do seem a little different, but otherwise, mostly the same. And only different because being a Dialga clone, as it says here. Same as Zekrom over here. Our Landorus apparently was originally going to be pure ground type, then later on changed to ground rock type, and then later on changed to ground flying type. But it seems in the early build when it was a pure ground type, it still had Sand Force before it was given Sheer Force later on. Too bad that was unobtainable at the time, up until Generation 8, by the way. Kind of glad they changed it to ground flying, much better typing than pure ground or ground rock. Imagine if it was ground rock type, I don't think people would be using Tornado or Landorus as much. Now, Kyurem was originally going to have Mold Breaker as a hidden ability, but was changed last minute, it looks like. And some different stats. And then Keldeo of the Swords of Justice was originally going to be fighting water instead of water fighting. Totally different. And still Suicune clone and placeholder builds. Meloetta. Instead of having the Pixie base 100 stat layout, it got different stats later on. But likely use Jirachi as a placeholder once again. Genesect with Flash Fire. Actually, I think that's a joke by the devs. It being a Heatran placeholder, and then having Flash Fire in earlier builds before giving it download. I think that has to be a joke among the devs. Most likely, that's probably why that's there. Alright, and the cut Pokemon? The Tanisu line. Originally going to be Bug Water type before being changed to the Temple line that we see later on. That's why they have Water Ground over here before they were cut. Our cut line for Snail Pokemon that would later be replaced by the Temple line, originally conceived as being Carol Blast Arrival. Evidently, did not make it far into development, as only a single revision of its stats exist. And that unused dog Pokemon, Godoken, a small dog-like Pokemon, nothing more than a placeholder stats, removed early on and ended up being replaced by Lilligant, and apparently had Leaf Guard. Imagine a dog holding leaves to guard against. Alright, and finally, the last part of this video for today will be some unused learned sets. Alright, just like the previous ones, and I'm going to go through this quickly, so if you'd like, just so the video doesn't drag on for too long, so if you'd like, just pause the video at any point to read the different stats, and I'm only going to go over the more notable ones. Alright, just like how Victini apparently at some point in development was going to have Psycho Boost. I mean, it already had so many other Signature Boosts thanks to events. Did it really need another one? And some other placeholders like Jirachi stats as placeholders. Alright, Sacred Fire and Psycho Boost. These moves were seemingly placed as a stand-in for Searing Shot and Stored Power, respectively, which were added in final learned sets in March 3rd, 2010. Didn't read the whole thing for a reason. Just to save time. But imagine Victini with Psycho Boost as well. It doesn't need it. It got Glaciated, it has 2 signature moves, it has Fusion Flare, Bolt Strike, Blue Flare thanks to certain events, all that stuff. It didn't need Deoxys' signature move as well. Apparently Patch had a Razor Leaf at some point in development, likely just a placeholder. I want to say, maybe not Sunkern stats, some other Pokemon stats, I don't know. The Patch line started off with dummy movesets, only consisted of move Razor Leaf, likely because that was one of the first move animations they finished and just used that as a placeholder. As he said, dummy moveset. Dummy isn't a test dummy, by the way. Not that I'm calling Patch a dummy, but it might as well be a dummy, let's be real. Actually, Semi-Sage Leaf Storm would have been pretty neat. I kind of wish they kept that in its moveset. Also, we'll give Semisear Overheat as well, which didn't happen, it looks like. And apparently Semisear was going to have Ally Switch. Funny. They would have gotten at least a bit more competitive use if that were the case. And Muna having Psycho Boost in its moveset as well. Rockside is a dummy move over here. Again, placeholder and beat up freaking Flamethrower. How much you want to bet that's an inspiration for the Fletchling line in the next generation? As a circle, Flamethrower is pretty badass too. And Blitzel would have not been implemented yet, apparently. And Giga was originally going to have Autotomize, which, I mean, I guess makes it lighter, so it has some use over Rock Polish, but still, a little redundant. Rock and Roll line started as a Geodude clone, with their learned sets being identical. The line went through relatively few changes. They got a new early draft learned set on December 20th, 2009, and they received their final learned set, level up learned sets on February 9th, 2010. We're back with the placeholder move of Razor Leaf, Rock Slide for Drillbur, extra drill had not been implemented yet. Drillbur was at some points. Final Gambit, I don't know. I mean, I don't think Onno's fast enough for that, but it does have the HP stat to use that decently well, I'd say. Assuming you can get the move off first, that is. And Double Slap was removed from its placeholder moveset in favor for the low kick. Not a bad choice, honestly, especially in early game. The Senpou line replaced the Katanisu line, and received traces of them can be seen in the last learn sets of the Tanisu line. When the Senpou line got their own learn sets proper, they were largely finalized already. In mid-February, Faleo replaced Stoke, and by March 7th, they had received their final learn sets. Water Sport, a useless move, was removed in favor of Supersonic. Warbound and Uproar swapped places. As Seismitoad had one additional revision after this, in late March, Drain Punch was added to his learn set, and the move after it had its level shifted to accommodate the change. Judging by the level up learn sets, Sakura originally occupied each other's slots, with their move sets eventually being swapped in March. Alright, dummy move of Razor Leaf, and that is a move it can normally learn in the final game. Continue line also started off with Razor Leaf, same with Petal, it looks like. While Lilligan later getting Rock Slide for some reason as a placeholder move. Petal started out with a dummy move set only consisting of the move Razor Leaf, while Lilligan had dummy move set of only Rock Slide. This disparity is due to it taking the slot of the Kagoroken. Basculin over here, Sandile, having Water Gun as a placeholder, likely a placeholder from, I want to say, the Totodile line. The Sandile line started out with the dummy move set only consisting of the move Water Gun. While these one-move dummy move sets are usually non-indicative of the Pokemon typing, it should be noted that the Sandile line were water types at this stage in development. When the line got their first proper moveset in the October 2009 build, they were already pretty fleshed out. In fact, the level up order of Sandile was set at this point, only getting 2 additional slots in later revisions. The level up order of Krokorok and Crocodile got changed in the early February revisions due to the evolution line of Krokorok being changed. As for the moves themselves, they were largely the same in the late October 2009 revision and in the final. However, there were a bit of changes in between. In later December 2009, then Gen 5 move Bulldoze, Quash, and Foul Play replaced Assurance, Embargo, and Sucker Punch, respectively. Not all of these changes stuck around. Assurance and Embargo are added back into the following revisions. In addition to this, Torment replaces Taunt, and Bulldoze is moved one slot down. Scary Face, Earthquake, and Sandstorm get pushed down in the lunch slot, and Dig is added to the slot where Earthquake used to be. A while later, on May 11th, and a final change is made by removing Bulldoze in favor of Mud Slap. Well, that was long-winded. Rock Slide for Darumaka. Razor Leaf for Maractus. I started have a double move there. On October 26, 2009, Maractus gets its first proper moveset, which isn't too dissimilar to the final one. In early February 2010, it received a new level up order, plus some more changes. Spin Missile replaced Fury Attack, and the moves Petal Dance and Solar Beam are added. The 2 revisions after that are pretty straightforward, adding 2 moves after Solar Beam. Cotton Guard is added on March 23rd, and After You is added on June 16th. Alright, next up Dwebble and Crustle. They had a more fleshed out, well, maybe not fleshed out, but definitely a bit more of a starter moveset here. And Scratching Scrafty originally being Tyrogue clones. And Hitmonchan clones, as you saw earlier. Sigil started out with Flamethrower as a placeholder, same with the MS line. The MS line started out with the demo moveset only consisting of the move Flamethrower. Judging by their level of learned sets, EMS and Kafagrigas originally occupied each other's slots, with their movesets eventually being swapped in mid-November. Alright, like the Tortuga line, the Archon line started as a clone of the Kabuto line. They got a new early draft learn set on December 20th, 2009. In early February, they got their first proper learn sets. These learn sets were very close to final, with only one revision after it. On February 15th, After You was removed in favor of Crunch. So we're also starting over Rock Slide. As I started out, yeah, I already said that. Same with Minjuno. Gothita starting off with Teleport. Then getting a more fledged out moveset for Gothorita and Gothitelle. The Gothita line started as a clone of the Acro line. They got a new... Oh, that's why they had those moves there, alright. They got a new early draft learn set on December 20th, 2009. In early February, they got their first proper learn set. These learn sets were very close to final, with only one revision after it. On February 24th, Lovely Kiss was removed in favor of Charm. Alright, here's Solosis. The Solosis line. Looks like most of their moveset was mostly done early on. Alright, Ducklet line. Had Fly in its moveset at some point, which is interesting. The Ducklet line started as a clone of the Wingull line. They got a new early draft learn set on December 20, 2009. In early February, they got their first proper learn sets. These learn sets were very close to final, with only one revision after it. On February 15th, Soak was removed with Aqua Ring taking over a slot, while Defog was added to Aqua Ring's old slot. Additionally, Hydro Pump was removed in favor of Hurricane. Alright, the Vanillite line. Using the Spheal movesets. Vanillite line started as a clone of the Spheal line. In early February, they got their first proper learn set. In the case of Vanillite and Vanillish, these learn sets ended up being their final ones. Vanillix had one additional revision after, with the addition of Weather Ball on top of its learn set in late March 2010. And Dueling Line is just blank for some reason. Alright. That's the end of Pokemon data. And in the next video, we can look at the move data over here. So that is what we will look at there, as well as some unused maps that we didn't get to look at up to this point. Alright, so I think that will be it for this edition of Unused Content and Games, Part 6 of Pokemon Black and White Unused Content. If you all enjoyed this and you want to see more, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. Consider it in question today of all, as usual, of all the unused content we went over today. Which one would you have liked to see in the final game and why? For me, I'd say, I guess, what was it? Not the Amoonguss with those different stats, but perhaps Gothitelle with Prankster would have been pretty damn sick. But otherwise, that'll be it for this edition. See you in Part 7 when we go over move data and maps. Thank you all for watching, and have a terrific day. Hope you learned something new today.